Hello, Westminster family. It's good to be with you this morning. I don't really have any new announcements. We're just looking forward to begin in-person worship on June 7th. But I'd like to bring some thoughts from the end of the book of 2 Kings, which you might think, isn't that kind of an obscure part? But I think it's relevant to us. If you know the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, they begin with the reign of Solomon in 1st Kings, and then you see the downward trend of the kingdoms of Judah and Israel. In the kingdom of Judah, there are some upward times with good kings and revivals, but for both of the nations, the trend spiritually is downward. And so we know that in 722, we find in these books that the nation of Israel, the northern nation, is taken into captivity. And then finally, at the end of 2 Kings, we see the terrible ending of the nation of Judah, when Jerusalem is destroyed by Babylon and the nation is taken into captivity. The temple is destroyed, and it's really one of the lowest points in the history of God's people in the Old Testament. But certainly our present experience with the coronavirus is not such a dark time. It's a difficult time, and not an easy time for us as a nation or as a local community or as a church. But I take us to this ending statement of 2 Kings in order to receive encouragement from the truth that we find here. Let me read the final few verses of 2 Kings 25, beginning at verse 27. And in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seat of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king according to his daily needs, as long as he lives. In this ending statement of 2 Kings, we see the truth about the certainty of God's purposes and God's plan being fulfilled. There's debate over why the book of 2 Kings ends this way, but I take the view that the author, by the work of the inspiration of the Spirit, is highlighting that even in this very dark time, with Jerusalem destroyed, with the walls of Jerusalem destroyed, with the temple torn down, with God's people torn away into exile, that we see here a remarkable truth that God has sovereignly preserved the royal line of David, which he promised would lead to the Messiah. Now, the history of Jehoiakim is that in 597, when the first wave of exiles was taken into captivity, he was taken into captivity as well. He was a teenage king at the time who had only reigned in Jerusalem for 3 months. He was a young man. And then we see that for 37 years he was imprisoned in Babylon in exile. And in the meantime, after that, there were other waves of exile. And about 10 years after that first wave, Jerusalem itself was destroyed in 586 BC. And now just think of him in his 50s. After being in prison and exile for all of these years, finally he is released by Evil-Merodach, this new ruler of Babylon, and raised up and given an allowance and allowed to sit at the king's table. And of course, he eventually dies in exile. But why highlight this fact? Well, we know the end of the story. We know that in Matthew chapter 1, in the genealogy of Jesus Christ, which Matthew recounts there, we find that Jehoiakim is in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Matthew's account gives us the genealogy of Jesus through his adopted father Joseph, and there a variant of the name Jehoiakim is found, Jeconiah, but they're both the father of Shealtiel, and so we know it's the same individual. And we see that in Matthew's gospel, with the coming of Jesus Christ, God has fulfilled and preserved the promise to David, the royal line through whom would come the Christ. So even at this dark and very tenuous time when it seems that the royal line of David is going to be cut off with Jerusalem destroyed, God's purposes were being fulfilled. And my point there is to see the encouragement of that God's purposes in this world are being worked out and always fulfilled according to His sovereign will. Now we live in the full daylight of the fact that Jesus Christ came in history and fulfilled all the promises in the Old Testament. And now Jesus is building His church and bringing in a great harvest from all the nations of the redeemed of every language and tribe and nation. And nothing can thwart His mighty work. Not the coronavirus. Nothing can thwart the work of Christ. And we can now see that God has been true to His word, and even through this pandemic, we know that He is faithful. And so He calls His people to trust in Him, to serve Him gladly, to rejoice in Him, no matter what the circumstances of our lives might be, to love others, to declare the gospel in any way that we can, and to adorn that gospel with the way we live. And one day, maybe very soon, who knows, Jesus Christ is going to return, and He's going to make all things new in the new heavens and the new earth. And so the word of exhortation and comfort to us all from this conclusion of 2 Kings is, Christian, lift up your head. Your redemption draws nigh, in the words of Jesus. Our God is on the throne. Nothing can stop the advance of His kingdom. Be encouraged. Be strengthened in His word. Trust that He is at work, even when we can't see exactly what He is doing, even in times that are difficult. May God be with us through this time.